Hey everyone, today we're going to take a look at a new 7840U device that I recently picked up called the AOKZOE A2. We'll start off first by doing a physical overview of the device. So the front has a glass panel that has a bezel-less screen. The small line beside the screen is actually a screen protector, it's not a bezel. At the top we've got our power, volume, headphone jack, USB-C, USB-A, and a micro SD slot. Looking at the bottom, we've got some down-facing speakers and another USB-C port. It's hard to capture on my camera, but the device has a very slightly warm white tone to it. Now taking a look at the ergonomics, the device feels really good in the hand. It has nice big grips which make it comfortable to hold. The joysticks feel like they're in just the right place and they have a very wide range of motion. With the larger joysticks, they do feel a little bit loose, so that's something I'm going to fix with a new module, but we're reviewing it as it is when you buy it. The face buttons feel really good and they're nice and large, and the D-pad we'll cover a little bit later on. In the bottom right corner, we have a turbo button, which brings up a pull-out menu, and then we also have a keyboard and mouse button. In the top left and top right, we have our back and our start button, and at the top, taking a look at the triggers, they do feel a lot better than last year's model. And same goes for the bumpers, they feel pretty good. The plastic at the back has a little bit of a coarse feeling to it. Now, it could be just my model, maybe it was a bit of a defect, but it is a little bit more coarse than I expected. I did notice that the device feels a little bit bottom heavy, like the weight rests in your palms, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Overall though, it's a fairly comfortable device to use. For the specs of the device, we have the Ryzen 7 7840U with 32 or 64 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM, running at 7500 megatransfers per second. For the display, we have a 7-inch 1200p IPS display at 60 Hz. We've got Hall effect triggers and joysticks. We have a 2280 size SSD. The device weighs about 670 grams and has a 48.5 watt-hour battery. For I/O, as mentioned before, we have two USB-C ports that are USB 4, we have one USB-A port that is USB 3, a headphone jack, as well as a micro SD slot. And that about does it for the basic specs. If you'd like to see the full spec sheet, I'll leave a link to their website down below in the video description. And now I'll show you what the device actually weighs, as well as do a quick comparison between some of its closest competitors. And now that we put it on the scale, you can see that it weighs 671 grams, so it's about the same weight as an LCD Steam Deck. And here it is beside the Neo 2. It is a little bit wider and slightly thicker. Next, we'll compare it with the Legion Go, which is quite a bit taller, quite a bit wider, and has a much larger screen coming in at 8.8 inches. Next, we'll take a look at it beside the Steam Deck OLED, which has a larger screen, and it's also wider and taller than the A2. But interestingly, is also lighter. Now we'll take a look at the ROG Ally, which is very similar in size, but we have the king of bezels versus the bezel-less display. In the Ally, as well as the next device, you can see that they're both 16:9 displays, where the A2 is a 16:10. And here it is beside the onexfly, which has the same size screen, but is a much smaller device. And of course, we've got to test it against the original A1, so you can see that the screen is much larger on the A1, but it's also not a lot bigger, so the A2 is actually pretty wide. Next, we'll take a look at the AOKZOE software, the 1X console. This is where you can adjust your TDP, your fan, vibration, RGB, you can get an overlay for your performance, and a number of other settings. One thing to note is a lot of these menus have a side menu that can push out to get more settings where you just have to press the Y key. For example, here I'm able to adjust a custom fan curve. If you press A on the resolution button, you'll get a list of resolutions. If you go to the RGB and press Y, you can turn it on or off, or you can press A to select different colors. Some of them are solid and some of them are animated. The software also has a performance overlay that you can adjust the settings by pressing Y, so you can put a frame limit, you can adjust the size of the overlay, and you can also adjust the themes. You can have it vertical, horizontal, whatever you'd like. And to activate it, you just press A on that button in a game. There's also built-in gyro controls into the software, so you can turn it on to use either gyro joystick, you can have a mouse, you can set it as a DualShock 4, mouse, Xbox gamepad. For this demo, I'll just select mouse, and then you can see if I move the device around, my mouse cursor moves, so the gyro does work on this device right out of the box. And then you have brightness controls, volume, and sound vibration. You can also do a memory cleaner that you tap the button and it'll just free up any memory that could be freed. And then this last little button will open up the full software where you can boot games, you can adjust your controllers, and do a number of other settings. You can access this overlay by tapping the turbo button, or you can hold it to open up the full program. So here is the full program. You can see that you can do updates from here. You can adjust the VRAM. There's also some settings for your controllers. There's also a section where you can get some helpful software like your game stores, you can get hid hide, HW info, and a few other things that might be beneficial for this device. And lastly, I haven't set it up yet, but on the library tab, you can get your games to show up here so you can boot them directly into either Steam or GOG Galaxy, Epic, whatever game store you're using. Next, I wanted to go over the D-pad because this is often a question that people ask about handhelds, whether the D-pad is good or bad or if it's serviceable. So I did test two different games that should give you a rough idea. Basically, I'm going to be showing you on Street Fighter V as well as Celeste. And as you can see in the video here, I'm not really having too much problems with some of the special moves. Every now and then I'll accidentally have a miss input, so some of that is the D-pad, some of that's just me. One thing I will say though is that I found that you need to push the D-pad just a little bit harder when you're doing diagonals, so maybe I'm just a button masher, I naturally do that, so I didn't have too much issues. But it is something I did notice and I figured it was worth noting. Now for Celeste, it's kind of the same thing. If you're doing a diagonal, you do have to apply a little bit more pressure than maybe you would on something like a Steam Deck, but it's nothing like dramatic. Like I'm not talking that you have to like reef on this thing or anything. For this D-pad though, like depending on where you're coming from, there's probably going to be a little bit of adjustment to get used to it. Like I got used to it fairly quickly. So the verdict on the D-pad for me is the D-pad's alright, like it's not amazing, but it's not bad, like it does the job, and I wouldn't let it necessarily be a barrier for purchasing the device if you're looking at it. Like I don't think it's so bad that you would not buy the device. But if the majority of the games you play are using the D-pad, just keep in mind that you're probably going to need a little bit of time to adjust, and there are other games that require more precise movements that I haven't tested here. You can always check out Retro Game Corp's video as well. I believe he tested this device, and he usually does a Contra test, I believe it is. So give his video a watch if you're looking for another perspective on it. I believe he tests Contra, and I think he also does Celeste and Street Fighter. It's a very common D-pad testing games. Next, on to the screen. So I didn't do a typical screen test that I normally do because this is a first look review. I'm not going to be going as in-depth on this one. Having said that, my first impressions of the display is that it's not a bad display. The colors are fairly accurate, the colors seem to be vibrant, but one thing that it does seem to lack is it's not as bright as some of my other handheld devices. If you're playing indoors, I don't think that's going to matter, but if you're on like a train or a bus or something with daylight, you might find that it's a little bit dim. One of my other critiques is that it's a 60Hz display instead of 120. Now, most of the games you're not going to be playing above 60 FPS. But for me personally, sometimes I use my handheld with an eGPU and it's kind of nice being able to push up into the 100-120 FPS range. And the last thing is that the screen is a 16:10 aspect ratio, so I have a YouTube video playing on right now and you can see the bars at the top and the bottom. That may happen in some games. But one of the benefits is for emulation, a 4:3 aspect ratio is going to look much larger on a 16:10 display. Now we'll move on to a couple quick game tests, so I'll show you a few games and I'll put the settings in the top left as well as the game title in the bottom right. Before I move on to my summary and final thoughts, I wanted to show you one cool accessory that is plug and play with the AOKZOE A2, and that's the OneX GPU. I purchased the 1X GPU during their campaign and it happened to just arrive at the same time. I'll be reviewing this in another video, but just to give you a quick summary, it has an AMD 7600M XT, has some pretty decent I/O as well as a M2 slot underneath. To get it to work on either an external display through HDMI or internally to push the image back to your screen, you just need to make sure your eGPU is turned on, press the turbo button, because of course you're going to want that extra power. It'll pop up a connected message and then you're pretty much good to go. It should pop up on the screen shortly after. Now that it's connected to the TV, grab your favorite controller and now we can play games on the TV just like a home console. And now we'll finalize our first impressions review with some of my thoughts, some of the things that I like about the device, and maybe some things that could be improved. I'll start off first with the things that I like about the device. So one thing I really like is the ergonomics of the handheld. It's a very comfortable handheld to hold. It doesn't seem to be too heavy, and the nice grips at the back make it so you feel like you're actually grabbing onto something. Like I don't feel like I'm going to drop the handheld at all because I have some nice grips at the back. The second thing that I really like about this device is actually the aesthetics of it. Like it's a nice looking device. I really like having the glass front without a bezel. Just like on the Neo 2, I really like the look of that device as well. One thing that I wish that they kept from the prototype was actually the gray joystick cap. It just kind of blended in better with the device, but I mean, it's not a big deal. I could just buy my own cap to put on top. Something else that I like about the device is that the minimum RAM is 32 gigabytes and you can get up to 64 gigabytes, so you're not really going to worry about running out of RAM. Not that a lot of games really require that much extra RAM, but it's nice to have that because you can be a lot more liberal in assigning your VRAM. And another thing that I like is how much I/O this device has. It's nice to have all these options. And now moving on to things that can be improved. So the first thing that I would note is actually the screen. I wish that it had 120 Hertz and was maybe a little bit brighter. The screen isn't bad, but it's definitely one of the aspects that can be improved. The second thing that I would say would be the speakers. They're not bad by any measure, but I guess I've gotten used to the onexfly, which is actually very, very good. The ROG Ally is also pretty good, the Steam Deck. So while not bad, there is certainly room to improve if they want to catch up to some of the competing devices. And thirdly, I would say the joysticks. Now for me, it's actually a good thing that they have such a wide range of motion. I do like that because I'm going to be doing a mod to fix it to be a little bit tighter. But we're not reviewing what I'm going to fix, we're reviewing what we get with the device itself, and the joysticks do feel fairly loose. So I'll be giving some feedback about the joysticks, and hopefully that's something that they'll be able to address in a future device. But if you are looking to buy, just be aware that the joysticks feel a little bit looser, but you do get a nice range of motion. And now the full summary. If you'd like to take a closer look, feel free to pause the video. And that's my quick review of the AOKZOE A2. I am planning to do a couple other videos for the A2 as well as the onexfly. So stay tuned for those. I'm planning to do a SSD upgrade for both devices, and I'm hoping to do a combined day one guide for those that are still looking to purchase. And just because I've finished my first look review doesn't mean that I can't make more AOKZOE content. So if you guys have any requests that you'd like to see, maybe comparing devices, or maybe a more in-depth review a little bit later on once I've had time to really just like play with the device, get familiar with it, just drop those requests in the comment section and let's talk about it. I probably will do a joystick upgrade for the modules to make them tighter, and hopefully I'll be able to create that into a guide as well. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you've been watching the channel for a while, maybe consider subscribing. It really does help. And of course, let me know what your thoughts are of this device. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comment section. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.